Welcome to the Rebuild Procurement Podcast, the number one podcast in the world, where we dive deep into topics to keep procurement people up to date and ahead of their peers. Please subscribe on YouTube, Apple, or your favorite podcaster of choice. We always appreciate you subscribing, liking, commenting, sharing, whatever you do with this podcast with your friends and your coworkers. On today's episode, it's going to be a solo episode. Actually, my first solo episode without Tommy. He is stuck in budget land today. And I thought I would just talk a little bit about my sales philosophy, go a little deep into what it looks like, very specifically in the procurement world. I'm Alan Veeck, a procurement geek on the sell side of our street, and I've assembled a team of superhuman procurement professionals doing managed services at a little company that we love to call Summit. All right, let's dive right in. So sales. It's kind of a loaded word. When I think about the word sales, I think it's got oftentimes a lot of negative connotation. A lot of people like to think of sales as kind of this odious, greasy used car sort of industry. And I understand that. I've certainly run across my fair share of those sorts of sales professionals. But in the world of procurement, I think it definitely looks different. I would also encourage everybody to think about sales more broadly. Everybody sells. If you think you don't sell, you're just not thinking broadly enough, I don't think. Everybody sells. We're selling things to our friends, whether it be goods and services or ideas. We're selling thoughts. We're selling any number of things where you're trying to basically convince somebody that they need to do something, convince somebody of your point of view, persuade them to take an action. Everybody sells. We sell to our friends. We sell to our families. We sell to our kids. We sell to our neighbors. Everybody is active in some sort of selling. It just depends upon how you look at it. So with that out of the way, I thought I'd dive a little bit more deeply into how my thinking about sales in the world of procurement has evolved over the years. And I thought I'd start by telling some stories. So way back, let's jump in the Wayback Machine and go back to 1996. It's my first job out of grad school. I had gotten a PhD in chemistry, and it took me 4.5 years basically to figure out that chemistry wasn't going to be the future of my life. And I looked around and said, okay, what can somebody with a degree in a PhD in chemistry do? Luckily, right about that time, 1996, the world of consulting was opening up and growing and had really started to look with some interest at the PhD degree. The word was that basically a lot of the hiring of MBAs had been saturated. So leading consulting firms were starting to look to other pools, other channels to find good candidates to come in and work in the consulting arena. And so coming out of grad school, I interviewed with 5 or 6 different consulting firms. Luckily, was able to get an offer from one of the leading consulting firms, McKinsey. And that's what brought me to Pittsburgh. And that's actually what got me my very first procurement experience. So I did several studies, but the very first one was working for a steel and bearings manufacturer. And they had probably on the order of about $10 billion in spend. And they'd engaged McKinsey to come in and basically help them drive some savings in that $10 billion of spend. And the very first client that I worked on, I remember some great things. First of all, I remember grabbing a hold of a huge Microsoft Access spend database. And I remember working with an external service provider to McKinsey who was a data specialist. And we basically cranked through that data file, trying to find good nuggets of spend where we could do some good sourcing and good procurement activity. And while we probably could have run a whole bunch of great sourcing events, it's interesting. Our focus was much more on something that I think gets short shrift in the world of procurement these days. It was around supplier management. And we took some of the biggest suppliers, 5 or 10 of the biggest suppliers to this company. And these were suppliers that were bringing on the order of $1 billion of goods and services into the company. And we invited them into company headquarters for 2 or 3 days. And we would basically just roll up our sleeves and sit around a conference room table. We'd assembled a cross-functional team from the client side, and we'd ask the supplier to do the same thing, to bring kind of their leadership and a cross-functional team into this conference room for a couple of days. And we just basically talked about relationship, and we talked about the goods and services that were being bought, and really tried to find, how can we work together better to take cost out of our relationship. And it was just mind-blowing to me. I was amazed to see what sort of progress could be made in a short 48 or 72 hours of really talking about some things that had never been talked about before. We did this with 5 or 10 suppliers, and we had some amazing results. So that was my first experience in procurement. I then took that from McKinsey after working there for about 3 years, took it to a company called Free Markets. It was a startup. It was really a part of kind of the big .com boom. And Free Markets' claim to fame was being really one of the first reverse auction companies, online reverse auction companies. And I'd say that's really where I cut my teeth in the world of procurement, learned a ton about sourcing. And so now fast forward to 2002, I got invited to build out the pre-sales team at Free Markets. So we'd grown quite a bit. We'd added a bunch of frontline salespeople. And the way I would describe these frontline salespeople is wonderful people, great general athletes, but didn't necessarily know a ton about procurement. So they were constantly reaching down into the organization, taking people like me and asking us to come on sales calls so we could talk about what we do, talk about how we make the donuts, right? How do you set up a reverse online auction? How do you set up a sourcing project? Because in general, the salespeople didn't have the ability to talk that talk. They had the ability to run a sales cycle, but they didn't necessarily know the in-depths, the in and outs of procurement. So they would pull in practitioners like us, people who manage delivery, to tell the stories about how we do what we do. And that would make for an effective sales cycle. Well, there was so much of this reaching down into the organization and grabbing delivery people that was being done by the salespeople that I was asked to build a pre-sales team. So it was a group of specialized delivery folks, and we built this globally, and we had about 20 people in this pre-sales network. And the whole idea was, let's try to systematize how delivery can work with sales to make their sales cycles more effective. So that was really kind of I would say, my bridge from being a delivery person, a doer, a person inside procurement, into the world of sales. So I did that probably for on the order of about a year, built a good team, handed it off to another leader, and then got invited by the VP of sales to join the sales team. And I kind of remember this was about 2002. So say that I'd been doing procurement for about 5 or 6 years. I kind of remember thinking to myself, I'm not really a sales guy, but I kind of went with the flow and decided to take a flyer and give it a shot. My dad is an old school sales guy, so I think I grew up around sales, and I think it's in the DNA. So it was a pretty easy thing to say yes to. And I remember my very first couple of years in sales, having this what looked to be a humongous sales target, and thinking to myself, how in the world am I going to achieve that sales target? And I remember thinking, well, if I try to open up a spreadsheet and figure out how I can get to that sort of a sales number, that's not really going to work. What I need to do is I need to just focus on the fundamentals, look long range, look long term, look way down the road, and just do a whole bunch of the right things, and then trust the process and see what would come of it. So I started traveling out to the list of 5 or 6 clients that I owned. They were largely current clients, places where I had some relationships. And my job was really to increase the size of those relationships with the client. And I remember one of the first philosophical ideas that I had, one of the first philosophies that I wrote was, I need to be on site with my clients. It's not good enough for me just to try and do this over the phone or do it through email. I really need to be on site with my clients so I can sit with them, break bread with them, understand what their pain points are, understand what their dreams and desires are. So I took 2 or 3 of the clients out of my list of 5 or 6 clients, and I would go and visit them once or twice a month and go and spend 2 or 3 days on site with them. And one of those clients in particular, in the course of discussion, I kind of uncovered some needs and desires and pain points that they had and proposed a really big solution to them. And lo and behold, the planets aligned, and I was able to close what at that point in time in my career was, kind of one of the first deals that I closed, but for probably 10 years, it was the biggest deal that I'd ever closed. And it was exciting. I remember the excitement of, it's not as much the excitement of winning a big deal as much as it is putting together such a big program, such a comprehensive program where you really think about your ability to drive significant change at a client. And I learned the ins and outs of selling across a broad set of stakeholders. The CEO was involved, the CFO was involved. I remember particularly the CEO was a table pounder. He really wanted to do this. He really wanted to make his mark, understood what procurement could do for him. He was a big champion for us. But interestingly, the CFO was a little bit more of a bump on a log. I used to call the CFO the chief blocking officer, the CBO, because I had to work my way through the CFO, and that was a bit painful. I learned tons of lessons about that. And then I had my day-to-day internal champion who I'd been working with for the course of a year to get this program in place. And I'm eternally grateful to that champion, still a friend to this day. And I'd say that's one of my most important learnings from those days was that you got to have an internal champion who you can talk with openly and kind of generously, and they're generous with their time, they're generous with their insights. You have to have somebody internally who's really going to help you push through what you're trying to push through. So that was a huge, important experience for me right around the 2002 era. Now, fast forward, I've been in sales ever since then. And so it's 23, 24 years of selling now. I've learned a ton, and my philosophy has definitely changed. During the time period between 2011 and 2018, when I was at Denali Sourcing Services, I think that I kind of employed the same philosophy that I did in the early 2000s when I was at Free Markets. It was, okay, I've got some pretty silly looking, humongous targets. I don't know how I'm going to hit them. So let me just try to focus on good practices and good sales practices, reaching out to my network, growing my network, going to conferences, presenting at conferences, presenting on webinars, doing some thought leadership, drawing on my experience from when I was in delivery and really understanding how procurement works, and see if I could build trust with a set of clients with a set of prospects to really turn them into clients. And I would say across the course of 7 years at Denali, that philosophy really worked. We were able to close lots of deals. And I would say even several very large deals, and build a whole bunch of great client relationships in the process. So that was an eye-opening process for me. When I left Denali and started my own business, not in procurement, but outside of procurement, I kind of tried to follow the same philosophy, but got into the world where it was much more a numbers game. I didn't have a network. I didn't have experience in what we were doing. We first started out doing RPA, robotic process automation. That was what I was selling. And that was a whole learning experience because I knew nothing about RPA. I had never been on the delivery side of RPA, a much more technical field. And we eventually pivoted that into selling quality services. So think Lean Six Sigma, continuous improvement services, process improvement services. Again, another industry where I had very little experience, very little practical experience. And so, my learning from those days was you had to approach those sales cycles very differently. So I learned a whole brand new world of lead gen and kind of email marketing, outbound marketing, a whole bunch of things that were kind of new to me and foreign to me. And what I discovered across that period of time was that I really wasn't comfortable in that world. That was where that world was one where I didn't have a ton of experience, and therefore I wasn't super successful. And I started longing to get back into the procurement world. And when I did, and did so with my current company, Summit Procurement, it felt like coming home again. It felt like being back in the warm waters of the pool that was in your backyard. It felt like returning home where you understood the language that was being spoken, you understood the rules of the game and how it was played. So coming back to Procurement in 2023, and specifically Summit Procurement, it gave me a good bit of time to really think about my sales philosophy. Somebody famous once said, "Nothing good happens until somebody sells something." Well, that's certainly true. In business, if you don't have any revenue, you can't start thinking about the bigger things of building a business. So the first thing I did in the first 6 or 9 months of Summit's life was focus on sales. I woke up every morning and really thought about, how am I going to sell? I tried some of the things that I'd tried in the lead gen email marketing world and very quickly found out that's not procurement. That's not the way the procurement industry operates. Procurement does not respect that sort of numbers game, that sort of quantitative game. Procurement really respects knowledge of the industry. It respects personal relationships, and it respects thought leadership and trust. So I turned off all of those lead gen campaigns almost immediately, with the exception of one. There's one lead gen campaign that I still use to today, until today, and that's LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great professional network, and I started to crystallize this idea that I've now called the network of 10,000. And my goal quickly became, I want to be connected with all of the 10,000 decision makers in the world of procurement. Now, I make up that number 10,000. I don't know if it's true. It could be 5,000, it could be 50,000, but I just kind of settled on this number 10K, 10,000, because it's kind of a way to think about our industry. Think about all the chief procurement officers, all the VPs of procurement, maybe even directors of procurement. There are different titles that exist in this world. But basically what I'm after is all of the decision makers who have budget to spend on a procurement, some sort of procurement goods or services that they're trying to buy. And I want to get to know all of those 10,000 decision makers in procurement. And I want to touch them once every 6 months, once every 12 months, with some element of relationship, with some element of thought leadership. Maybe that's new thinking around what it means to be a strategic category manager. It could be new thoughts around what a mature procurement organization might look like. It might be discussions around how to take spend data and turn that into actionable procurement services. But I want to build those relationships with the decision makers. I want to offer them thought leadership, and I want to touch them once every 6 or 12 months so that they know who Summit is. They know what we do. They know that we're out here. And if in that 6 or 12 month period, they've got some budget, they've got a pain point, they've got a decision to make where they need to buy some procurement services, I want them to think about Summit. So that's my goal, is really to get to know those 10,000 decision makers and to touch them with some regularity. So that's what we're about doing. This podcast is one of those ways that we want to do it. Typically, this podcast is very much focused on offering content, on offering thought leadership. And Tom is a great partner to do that with, being an inside procurement guy with a little bit of a finance bent. He's done strategic category management before. He's done lots of sourcing before. He's done a lot of supplier management before. So what we really hope to do on this podcast is offer good thought leadership to some of those 10,000 procurement professionals, so they know that we're out here at Summit and that we are practitioners that not only sell, but actually really, really focus on delivery. So I thought I'd just kind of share that. I think many of the listeners to this podcast probably exist on the buy side, not on the sell side like I do. Most of the listeners likely sit inside of a big Fortune 500, Global 2000 business, where you day in, day out practice good procurement practices. You're doing all the work. You're making the donuts. You're working hard to make sure that you lower risk and increase savings and offer a good, high quality service and experience to your stakeholders inside the business and to the suppliers that you work with. And just wanted you to know that Summit Procurement is here and wanted to offer a little bit of my philosophy behind how I sell. It's certainly a soft sales approach. It's meant to be focused on relationships and trust and thought leadership and content. And in the end of the day, high delivery and high quality delivery, and a way that we can jointly, all of us, work together to continue to increase the profile of procurement in the world, inside our companies and in the industry in general. So hopefully that was a helpful discussion today. If anybody has any questions or wants to dig into it a bit more, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me at Summit Procurement. And I'd love to continue the discussion. On behalf of your humble hosts here at Rebuild Procurement Podcast, we are Tom Finn in absentia, the guy who puts the fin in finance, and me, Alan Veeck, the OG in procurement, hoping you will make this a powerful and productive week in procurement. Bye-bye.
Show me, and you won't hear the word rebuild.